We saw the band Bush in concert. We mosh pit with Gavin Rossdale. Pretty fun. Attended the Waste Management kickoff party with Maroon 5. And Paul was training for a marathon. I saw him run in the Mesa Marathon. We visit all Paul's favorite restaurants and breweries. He had a whole list prepared for us during the trip. And there's a couple of things I learned about Paul that I discovered. His deep love for his family. I was able to spend the afternoon at the pool with his father, Tony, and his love for his sisters, Heather and Ashley. He was a proud uncle, and he made sure to attend all their sports games. He was so proud of them. And his impact in the medical community is another thing I found. I spent time with his colleagues from Mayo Clinic, and they were just ranting about his wealth of knowledge and how he was proactive with organizing get togethers outside of work. Paul, I'm so lucky to have you in my life and for you to be my best friend. We're going to celebrate you tonight, brother. I love you, and I'm here to announce our first speaker for the evening, Paul's sister, Ashley. Come on up.
Okay, it's very bright up here. Um, Good evening, everyone. My family and I would really like to thank everyone for coming tonight to celebrate the life of my brother. It means a lot to see so many people here who cared about him. Before I start, I would really like to thank Carter for emceeing tonight and for helping us with this event, and to all of our speakers tonight. I would also like to thank many of Paul's friends and colleagues for being there for me over the last 4 months, and to Jay and Tamara for being there with me that day. I'm so grateful that I didn't have to go there alone, and I will never forget what you did for me. Sorry, this is probably going to take me like 6 hours to read this paper. Okay. I had a really hard time writing this and trying to put together something that summarized 41 years of memories and also do justice to how amazing Paul was. I really wanted to capture how special he was and how much he meant to so many people, but it's actually impossible to do that in a 10-minute speech. Paul was just that special. Paul meant the world to me. But in reality, I always looked up to him. He was also my best friend and the person I leaned on for everything in my life. I knew no matter what that I had an opinion from him, even if I didn't like what to say. Our sister Heather and I are the emotional piece, and Paul was always that right that leveled us out. Paul was always able to be empathetic, even when he didn't agree with us. He always tried to see our point of view. Paul was one of the best listeners and always tried to help no matter what the topic was. There were many times when I would be asking him for advice on something or help with something, and I would think the conversation was over, and hours later I would get messages from him with research he did on the topic we were discussing. It didn't matter what it was either. He would put the same effort into looking up health concerns I had as to what restaurants I should visit on a trip to what I should do to fix a gear on my bike. He was always there for me and my family no matter what. I remember when Peyton broke her arm during COVID and I had to take her to children's emergency very late at night. And I get there all flustered, and guess who was standing at the front door waiting for us? He just always showed up. I literally would phone him every day while he was working, and I can count on one hand how many times he didn't call me back from that work phone within 30 minutes or send me a text saying he would call me back soon. Probably not the best thing to tell with his bosses here when he was supposed to be working, but my point is he just always made time. I was 2 years old when Paul was born, and I instantly had a best friend. I have so many wonderful memories with him growing up. Paul, Heather, and I were very close as kids and have been lucky enough to continue that through adulthood. We leaned on each other a lot. I have many memories of us spending Christmas Eve sleeping in our parents' bed waiting for Santa and spending every moment together at the lake in the summer. Paul, being the only boy, as intelligent as he was, definitely did like to get under his skin at times, though, when we were younger. And because he was so intelligent, he always seemed to find a way to outwit us. I will say that Heather probably took the brunt of his humor because she was the youngest. For example, the three of us used to sleep in the same room at the lake all summer, and because Paul and I were the oldest, we made her sleep on the floor. There was one summer, Paul decided to tell poor Heather that there were wolverines at the lake now. And he went into detail about how they had crazy claws and liked to dig. You can probably see where this is going. He ended up convincing her that these wolverines had been digging under cottages and stealing young kids. I can't remember how this all worked out, but I'm quite positive Heather didn't sleep on the floor after that. Okay. Paul was special from the moment he was born. He could read and do math before most kids could spell their name. He always enjoyed learning and spent a lot of his free time studying and bettering himself. I remember my dad brought a computer home from work when we were pretty young. Keep in mind, this is the 80s, so no one had computers or smartphones. And Paul just loved that thing and spent hours on it. We wanted to play games, but Paul wanted to learn math. When I was in high school, so Paul would have been maybe like grade 8 or 9, he spent his summers reading medical journals and would write to them. I have no idea what he wrote, but they would write him back thinking he was a doctor and he would get mail addressed to Dr. Paul Wawryko. He never stopped wanting to learn, even once he was done his fellowship. He always wanted to keep bettering himself. As most of you know, he had just gotten back from spending a year working at the Mayo Clinic in Arizona as the first ever Mayo Clinic pulmonary pathology fellow. He was very proud of this. I have a snippet from an email I received from one of the doctors he worked under while he was there that I would like to share. The pulmonary pathology community of Mayo Clinic was deeply saddened by Paul's death. Some of us had known him for a very long time as he had been a visitor to Mayo Clinic several times before becoming our first ever Mayo Clinic pulmonary pathology fellow. Your loss is tremendous, and we all want to express our heartfelt condolences at his passing. He was well liked by doctors and staff alike. He particularly endeared himself to the medical secretaries by initiating Trader Joe Tuesdays, which meant every Tuesday he brought treats from his trendy grocery store to share with everyone. Paul was funny, generous, articulate, and a good friend to many. The pulmonary pathology community also mourns his loss. Over the last few months, I've had the pleasure of getting to go into Paul's office and meet a lot of the wonderful people he worked with here at St. Boniface Hospital and hear stories about his career and accomplishments. Paul was very modest when it came to these things. He was incredibly brilliant his whole life and yet never bragged about his awards or papers he published or any achievement. I found out after he had passed about many awards and accolades that he never shared with us. Growing up, our dad loved the outdoors, and we spent a lot of time doing nature hikes, learning about birds, plants, and other animals. And Paul shared this love and appreciation for nature and especially animals. When we were younger, Paul would not let us kill any insects. He had so much empathy towards living things. I remember when I was learning to drive and we were up at the lake and I was driving our big blue van, a flew out in front of us and it hit the windshield. Paul was so angry at me. He yelled at me from the back seat and then wouldn't talk to me for the rest of the day. Paul truly felt at peace and whole when he was in nature. He took many trips all over the world to find these places and to explore and hike. There are so many places I can't name them all. He just loved to travel. He is not one to be afraid to be alone either. He signed up for a week-long group hike in BC a few years ago, and despite our concern of him going alone, he went and of course came back good friends with a bunch of people in the group. He also very much loved his remote canoe trips with close friends, and there were times he talked about the envy he felt towards people that could just live a minimalist lifestyle and live essentially off the land. There were even times we worried that he might just pick up and quit his job and do this. Paul cared so deeply for this earth and was very concerned about the future of our planet. Paul loved all of our pets growing up and just adored his most recent dogs, Rosie and Jim. He had a connection with all of our pets, and his connection with animals was far beyond anyone I know. Paul was also one of the most competitive people I've ever met, and I am pretty sure that anyone who played soccer, hockey, ultimate ball hockey, or ran with him over the last decade can attest to this. Paul invited me to play soccer with him a few years ago on some of his co ed teams. Paul never liked to lose, and I realized very quickly that this was still the case as an adult. He would not tolerate less than 150% effort from any of his teammates, and we spent at least 10 to 15 minutes after every game of him venting about all the things everyone needed to do better. So you can probably see why, when he decided to join my triathlon group and did the swimming lessons, that when the instructor made us all tread water while she was talking about the plan for the morning, poor Paul was struggling to stay afloat. So she stopped the group, put him in a swim belt, and so that he would not drown in front of everyone. I found this quite funny. He later got revenge when he did the actual Ironman race, though, and kicked my ass, and basically had enough time to have a nap before I crossed the finish line. He did tell me, though, that he went back to our truck while I was just finishing my run and started to change out of his sweaty clothes to find himself in a full body cramp and unable to move for several minutes while fully naked in the front seat of our rental truck with people walking by. Like everything else he did in his life, he put full effort into his training and became a pretty good swimmer. I did still make sure he got out of the water, though, before I got on my bike during that race. He was the only one in our group that read the book on how to swim that our teacher wanted us to read. He was definitely her favorite student. His running ability was crazy, and he was so talented and worked so hard. Running the Boston and Chicago marathons in under 3 hours is not an easy feat, and I was so proud of him for all these accomplishments. I feel so grateful that I was able to convince him to join triathlon and all the time we got to spend together training for it, talking about it and racing together and traveling. I love doing that race with him and the morning swims every week at 5 a.m. Every Saturday, we swam and went for coffee and a bagel at Hudson's Bagels and Tom Bargens and talked about life and the podcast he wanted me to listen to. I am definitely not a morning person and would always find getting up that early on a weekend very challenging, especially when it was cold out. There were so many Friday nights I knew he was going out with friends and thought, oh, good, he will cancel on me. And I went to bed thinking I won't have to get up at 4:45. Well, he never once canceled. He would be out until 2 a.m. or later, and I would still wake up to a text, see you at the pool, or on my way, see you soon. I will always cherish that race and the time I got to spend with him on that trip. I learned very quickly I had to adapt, though, when traveling with him to an event like this. I had done quite a few of these races, but all of them alone. I had family members there, but no one had competed with me. This race was special, and we got there, and I had my pre race plan all ready. And I figured since I had done these before, that he would look to me to learn how to prepare for a race. I was very wrong. I had the schedule for what we were going to do before a race and days leading up to the race, and I quickly discovered that was going to change. Day before a race, you always go to the venue and get in the water, do a short swim, do a bike, and shake out the legs with a bit of a run. Check in, get your gear ready, relax. Well, Paul had different ideas. He had already booked us at various restaurants, he had researched for all of our meals, and he wanted to explore the city. I finally convinced him to come to the swim start with me at least, where he proceeded to read and never even dipped his toe in the water while I swam. In the end, he still killed that race, and I wouldn't give up any of those memories or meals I shared with him. Paul was an amazing uncle to both my kids and Heather's kids, and over the last 5 years, he really made an effort to be more involved in their lives. He liked to ask what Peyton's race times were, and then would go and try to run them and see if he was still faster. And then he would report back to me. He really enjoyed watching them play sports, hearing about all their endeavors, and was always the first to comment when I posted something. Paul was a doer. Lots of people say they were going to do something, and then life gets busy or hard and plans change. Paul committed to something and stuck with it. He is the only person I know that literally always tried to improve himself at every level and was always able to self reflect and see how he could be better. He strived for greatness and at 41 achieved more than most people do in a lifetime. From education, career, physical, athletics, friendships, relationships, being a better partner to being an uncle, he was always trying to be better and put effort into doing so. He never broke plans. His word meant everything, and he always followed through. Paul had strong morals and always wanted to do the right thing. When I was helping him buy the last house that he moved into, it was recommended that he could offer less and that there was a good chance he could get it for that price. Paul refused because he didn't think it was fair and wanted to pay what he felt was fair for that house. I really don't know anyone like that. He just always wanted to do the right thing and truly cared about people. I think that is why there are so many people here today. Paul treated everyone like they were his best friend and made time for them because he legitimately cared about them and wanted them in his life. We all felt that, and it has been very evident to me talking to a lot of you over the last few months how Paul showed that and made everyone feel special when in fact he was the special one. I really wish I had told him more how much I love him and how much he means to me and my family. My kids adore him and looked up to him, and I know a lot of who he was will live on through them. There will be a huge hole in our lives that will never be filled with him gone. Paul was also one of the most generous people I know. He always tried to grab the bill. He enjoyed bringing over different food for us to try. He would see something someone would like and wouldn't blink twice about it for them, buying it for them, and for no reason. When we went to Phoenix the first time, he insisted on sleeping on an air mattress in his living room and giving us his 2 bedrooms, even though he was the one that had to work. He always just made sure everyone else was taken care of. This is just who he was. He had the biggest heart. My family and I were lucky enough to spend a lot of time with Paul, and especially during all the lockdowns with COVID. Peyton and my mom and I visited him in Phoenix for his birthday, and my dad, Peyton, and I were able to go visit him in February. Paul spent a lot of time with us during COVID, mountain and road biking, having bonfires, going on hikes, tie-dyeing, skating in our backyard, playing hockey with Hudson, going for runs with the kids. He made a special effort to always make time for everyone he cared about. He rented a remote cabin and took our dad out for a weekend to spend time with him. He would drive out to the lake to visit my mom. He put in so much effort to spend time with his family. It's hard for me to accept that I won't have him as part of my life anymore. And honestly, I feel like I will never be the same. Losing him has changed me. One more paragraph, I promise. Okay. I will miss his laugh, or should I say his chuckle the most, followed by his daily conversations about life and his never ending advice. I still go to call him every time I'm in the car. Weirdly enough, I hope that never goes away. Paul was my person. I always knew he was there for me. He gave me a perspective no one else could, and I know he did that for my sister as well. We miss him very much, and I'm very proud to stand up here and honor his memory. Thank you again for all coming and loving my brother. I love you, Paul.
Thank you, Ashley. Next speaker is my best friend, Jay Kilgore. Come on up.
Whoa, that's a great job, Ashley. That's tough to follow. Paul would have absolutely loved that this event sold out on Wednesday. There was more tickets released. I could picture the huge grin on his face as I was getting text messages from people asking if I could get them space or if more spots would be available. He loved a big event, and he loved it even more if it was tough to get tickets to. I did something I didn't I did something I didn't think I'd ever do last week. Well, two things. Number one, I went to a Taylor Swift themed spin class. Paul had been trying to get me to go to spin with him for a few years, so when our friend Hannah dedicated a Taylor Swift ride to him, I had to go. I really enjoyed it. He would have been really happy that I went. Second thing I did this week that I didn't think I'd ever do, I actually bought myself a Taylor Swift album. About a month ago, Ashley and Heather were kind enough to gift me Paul's record collection, making me the proud owner of all Taylor Swift albums on vinyl. Paul and I spent hours having beers and listening to music, and he had made a commitment to purchase one album a month to add to the collection, so I've continued that since December. Last week, I walked from my restaurant across the parking lot to McNally Robinson, walked in and found the records section. I circled the area containing the Tortured Poets department, working up the courage to grab one and head to the cashier. A lot of McNally Robinson staff come by our restaurant after work for drinks, so I know a lot of them. The cashier immediately recognized me as I walked up, which was pretty much my nightmare in this situation. As I got closer, I could see her look at the album and back at me a bit surprised. Naturally, I panicked and I asked her for a gift receipt. I actually told her that my niece is a big fan and I can't wait to give it to her this weekend. I didn't even make this up. I wish I was making this up. I walked out of McNally Robinson and I swear I could hear Paul laughing at this whole interaction. That that goofy chuckle of his that I miss so much. We're here to celebrate the life of my best friend Paul. Everyone in this room knew Paul in different ways. He was Dr. Wawryko to some, P-dubs, if you met him in the early 2000s at a bar and got his number. Patho Paul on social media, Dr. Grumpy Paul to some of his close friends. There's actually a hashtag on Instagram if you want to look it up. He was a son, a brother, a very proud uncle, a teammate, a colleague, a boyfriend, and most of all, probably what he was best at, a friend. I'm going to do my best to honor him today and celebrate his life. Summarizing the life of a 41-year-old taken from us suddenly and far too soon is one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Almost exactly a year ago, I wrote my father's eulogy at the Forks along the river with a laptop in front of me and a beer beside me. I was panicking a bit this week about how this speech would go, so I found myself at the same place, the same table, and hammered out what's most important to me when I think about Paul. As this day has come closer, I've realized something. There's absolutely no way that I can fully express what Paul meant to me. I could have 10 minutes up here or 2 hours, and it wouldn't make a difference. I'm going to spend my time today telling you some stories about two buddies hanging out, going through their 20s and 30s together, experiencing highs and lows, but always being there when one of them needed. I haven't been able to make it flow as well as I would like, but here it goes. For Paul and I, our friendship was always about showing up for each other, which links right into what Ashley was talking about, which is amazing. In different ways and at different times, no matter what we were going through at the time, we both showed up. We've become so close over the last 16 years that now when I show up somewhere alone, I usually get two questions. Is Aaron in town? And what's Paul up to tonight?